historically for years. So we're past Native Americans. I mean, look, Native Americans are going to come up again. I need you to understand that, right? Like, obviously, we can't continue to talk about U.S. history without talking about Native American and Native American interactions and things like that. But for the most part, we're now going to sort of shift ethnocentrically, and we're going to start looking at white folk. All right. So our next unit here is going to be really sort of colonial America. So we're going to cover, I mean, essentially, what Roanoke is 1590. I don't test you on dates. Let's go 1590. I forget the exact year. All the way up basically until 1776, right? And the American Revolution. So we'll talk about throughout this unit, and you'll get tested on some of the sort of causes or some of the things that are going to lead us toward the American Revolution. But that's going to be it. And we're going to focus on this from a very sort of American-centric ideology. So if you were to go and read a textbook, they're going to tell you about like the Glorious Revolution in England. I don't care. I don't care. All right. So 1587. See, this is why I have to put dates on PowerPoints. All right. So the Roanoke colony is the first real attempt by the English, and this is going to be very Anglo-centric. Like we're really just talking about the English because that's obviously what becomes America. And so the Roanoke colony is the first attempt at creating a permanent residential establishment here in the New World. Okay? That is not, just so we're clear, one, that is not the first interactions with whites and natives. That's not the first interaction between the British and natives. The British have already been coming over here and been engaging in other activities like commercial fishing along the East Coast, specifically up toward the New England area. Okay? But we're going to try to create a permanent settlement. And so the story goes, a fair amount of this is legend because we don't really know what happened to these people, right? It's called the Lost Colony of Roanoke, right? So a handful of people go over, they try to establish a permanent settlement, essentially in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, right? Since some of us love that TV show. Right, the Outer Banks.
Oh yeah.
I know you love that show. It's a good show. Okay, but so we're trying to establish a permanent colony there. Okay, Raleigh is going to go back to England, right? Because he's got to try to rally financial support for the effort, right? It shouldn't strike you as odd that setting up a new community, a new colony, would require a significant financial interest, yes? We're going to talk about the finances of all of this a little bit today, right? So they're going to go back, right? Raleigh goes back with a small number, tries to, basically beg rich people for money to help this. It actually takes him a fairly long time to beg for enough wealth or fundraise, let's call it that way. It takes him a while to fundraise to the point where he can, hire ships and sailors and supplies and resupply and all that. By the time he gets back to North Carolina, they're gone. The colony has up and disappeared. There's nothing but remnants. And then this painting is a recreation of it, but carved into a tree. It said Croatoan, which is the Native American tribe that I think probably the most commonly held belief now, guess, because again, we're guessing. We don't know what happened to these people. We don't have great records, right? I think the most commonly held belief is that those last sort of surviving settlers basically threw their hands up, gave up, and went to go live with the Native Americans. Right? Well, I mean, that's the thing is they I mean, y'all have to realize that you're talking about starting sort of society and culture from scratch, which is not an easy thing to do, right? Because when they come over here, they have no houses, right? They have no farms. They have no crops. They literally, the only thing you got is whatever you can fit on that ship with you, right? And then from there, you have to create, to generate everything yourself, right? And so what happens, especially in Virginia, because the other thing that we're going to do, specifically today and Friday, we're going to be looking at sort of the juxtaposition of Virginia and Massachusetts, right? Virginia and Massachusetts might as well be different countries. They come differently, they set up differently, they want different things, and so we're going to do a lot of compare and contrast between the two of them, right? Like, that's going to be a fairly substantial aspect of the test. You're going to need to be able to tell me which group, like, did what, okay? So, in 1607, we're going to try again, okay? We're going to fundraise again, and now we're going to fundraise through something called a joint stock company. So now we're creating a company, a business entity, right, that is selling stock. Do we know what stock is?
No.
Stock is just ownership in a company, right? So, like the New York Stock Exchange, like y'all realize you can go on the New York Stock Exchange and go buy like Apple, right? Like you love your little iPhone, go buy Apple. That means you actually own Apple. Like you are the owner of the business. You own like 1/10,000,000th of the company, or however many stocks they offer, right? Like you own so little that it's worthless, except in the fact that like Apple would continue to make money, and as they continue to make money, the value of the company goes up. Thus, the value you have in the stock goes up, right? So, stocks then are a way to generate wealth long term, right? But stocks are also great because they limit the sort of risk of the initial investors, right? Because now, instead of you fronting $100,000, right, or whatever it would have taken to cross the Atlantic and come here, right? Instead of you fronting all of that, right? Now that those initial costs are going to be offset amongst a large group of people, right? And I need you to understand, like if you were an investor, if you've got like a little bit of disposable income in 1605, and somebody comes to you and they're like, hey, do you want to invest in like the Virginia Joint Stock Company? Honestly, you'd kind of be foolish to say no, right? Now, ultimately, the Joint Stock Company doesn't make any money, but like, what if they got rich? Like, what if they had found gold in Virginia? They don't. They never find gold. But what if they had? Right? All of a sudden, you're going to be meat for the rest of your life. Right? Because I kick myself every day. Every day. Because I came this close to buying Bitcoin when it was $1. Like, I knew what Bitcoin was 12 years ago or whatever it was now. When one Bitcoin cost $1. You know what one Bitcoin's worth today? Like 30,000. So you realize, like, I could have bought $100 worth of Bitcoin, and now I'd be sitting on like $3 million for a $100 investment. Y'all realize that? Okay, so like, even if you don't necessarily think like the joint stock company is going to be successful, the risk to reward, right, is a good deal, right? Because you're giving up just a little bit of money with what could be sort of an exponential return, okay? So that's a joint stock company. That's one of the ways that the colonies will be founded, okay? So there's basically like 3 different ways that the colonies are founded. This is one. You need to understand that, right? Now, ultimately what happens in Jamestown is they don't find gold. In fact, Jamestown, I mean, we probably need to talk about this. Jamestown is just stupid. Like, these people, the people in Jamestown are actually evident of the fact that it's human nature, I guess. Right? Like, everybody in humanity is looking for that get-rich-quick scheme, yes? Like if I told you right now I had a way for you to make $1 million this year and you didn't really have to do anything, how many of you are in? Exactly, we all are. Right? Like every single one of us is like, oh my God. Like, so here's the thing. They get to Jamestown and you know what these people are doing? Wandering around looking for gold. No, they don't want to work. They don't want to build a town. They don't want to plow some fields. They don't want to cut down trees and build houses. They want to wander the countryside looking for gold. What you going to eat then? Because you can't eat gold. Actually, you can't eat gold. Gold is not toxic. You didn't know that.
Oh, that's like how?
How is gold not toxic?
How to eat it?
I mean, just swallow it.
Seems.
I mean, one, gold is actually a fairly soft metal, right? But like, this is a college class. I guess we can talk about this. You know what Goldschlager is?
Oh, yeah.
It's alcohol that has actual like little tiny flecks of gold in it. You can drink it.
I forgot
You
that.
like literally you be taking a shot of Goldschlager and like you drinking some gold. Right? It's not toxic, but like you're not going to eat it. You understand that, right? Like that would be ridiculous. So you're wandering around the countryside looking for gold and prioritizing a get-rich-quick scheme over survival. Y'all realize that? Survival. And here's the thing: English people, I can't say that I'm even mad at them because like if you think logically, right? Like we understand how like the globe works, right? And like lines of longitude and latitude and whatnot. Kind of, right? So if we were to look at my world map right here, right? Like here's London, right? And if we went across from London, we'd be like, I don't know, somewhere in Quebec, right? Like north of Newfoundland. Okay? What's the weather like in Canada?
Cold.
Sucks. Right? It's cold. All the time. What's the weather like in England?
Cold.
It actually ain't that bad.
It's yeah.
No, but it's not Canada bad. It's not Canada bad. And so I want you to understand, because logically, like again, if you're just thinking logically, you're like, well, I'm this far north in London, and then I go across and I'm that far north in North America, the weather should be the same. Should be equally as cold, yes? It's not. Right? We go from London substantially south down here to Jamestown, and the winters are worse. Did you ask how? It has to do with like circular airflow, right? So like it goes like this in the northern hemisphere up here, right? And so it comes down that way. And so you've got cold air coming out and down, and then you've got warmer air coming up. Right? Now y'all learned a little climate lesson. Alright, so this is what Jamestown's doing. I mean like just dumb on a level that it's just dumb. It's dumb. Dumb. But what happens, right? What happens? We remember that name John Rolfe?
Yeah.
Oh.
Pocahontas man? Right? John Rolfe and the people that he's leading in Jamestown, right? They figure out that Jamestown, Virginia, is actually really conducive to growing something called tobacco. Right? Tobacco becomes a cash crop. Okay? That is actually the term. And so now, all of a sudden, Virginia becomes profitable. They never found gold. They didn't really find anything of sort of substantial value until they realized that tobacco grows well in Virginia, and Europeans love their tobacco, right? Europeans are some smoking fools. All right? So now, all of a sudden, if Virginia wants to turn a profit, which is the whole purpose behind Jamestown, right? We trying to get rich. We're going to get rich via tobacco. Okay? All right? Now, what that means is we've got to have labor. Because agriculture is a very labor-intensive industry. And so we're going to talk about that in a second. I do want to go back there and just point out, like, Jamestown literally has to like create laws that say like if you just wander in the countryside looking for gold, you have to starve to death, right? They actually have to. No, because that's the other thing. Like, how many of you have ever been in a group project, right? And you was like, I'm not gonna do nothing because I assume like Maddie will do it all,
I would never.
right? Okay, maybe Maddie's the one that's like, I'm not gonna do anything because I assume somebody else is gonna do it. But y'all understand that happens in group projects all the time, yes?
Yeah.
Right? Like, please, I hope for your sake, you're not the one stuck holding the bag doing all the work. That's what's happening in Jamestown, though. Right? You have a very small number of people that are actually like farming and trying to plant, corn and things like that in order to survive. And then you've got these guys wandering the countryside all day long that come back at night and they're like, "Where's my dinner?" Bro, you ain't got no dinner. You didn't do nothing. They actually have to implement rules that say, look, man, if you're not helping the community is not going to feed you. Okay? All right, so this brings us to the labor issue. Right? And where does labor come from? Wrong. It is no, you can't. Okay, so they actually do try, Tyler. You're not wrong there. They try to enslave Native Americans, but it don't work. Right? Like, you can't enslave the Native Americans because the Native Americans just run away. They know the countryside. They know the land. Right? They speak the language. They can go join another tribe. Like, they can get away. They know where they're going. Right? We do have the first African slaves arrive in Virginia in 1619. Right? Like, that early on. 1619. You have the first African slaves. But it's not Africans that are coming initially. Right? It's white people. It's white slaves. White slaves.
Eastern Europeans.
Okay? No, not Eastern European.
The Ottoman Empire.
The Ottoman Empire don't bring slaves over here.
I know, but like,
Oh.
White slaves?
Actually, make no mistake. Y'all understand slavery existed everywhere on the globe at this point, yes? Like, slavery is and has been a wide-standing practice in history. Okay? Where do the white slaves come from? Jails.
So the white slaves are slaves to the whites?
Yes. So basically what happens in England, right, they call them indentured servants, but there's all kinds of records that we have that basically compares indentured servanthood to slavery, right? That it says that the slave and the quote-unquote indentured servant, right, are treated the same. Okay? Especially early on. They actually, like, bond with one another. They're treated the same. In fact, those 20 Africans that are offloaded in Virginia, some of them actually are, well, actually pretty much all of them, are treated as indentures, right? Meaning they're treated as indentured servants. They are not slaves for life. Okay? There's actually, we actually know that there are black people, right? There are Africans who come to the New World very, very early on, right? They're sold into slavery here in America. Okay? They're treated as an indentured servant. They spend their time in slavery and bondage. They're given their freedom. And then we actually have people of African descent as slave owners in the South. Right? So you have blacks in the South owning other blacks. Okay? For the most part, during the 17th century, that's the 1600s, most of the labor that is coming in the form of indentured servants. Okay? So indentured servants are coming from Europe. They are predominantly the poor, the destitute, the homeless, the vagrant, the people that are in debtor's prison, right? These are the people that are coming over here. Now, I want you to understand this because it becomes wildly complex. One, different people sign different contracts, but indentured servitude is basically selling yourself into slavery, right? So they sign different contracts that basically say, look, you bring me over to the New World, you pay for my passage, I will work for you for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Different people sign different contracts, right? And then at the end of that time, I'm in the New World, I'm free, I'm going to go stake my claim to a little bit of land, and I'm going to go work for myself, and like life is great, right? Hunky-dory, we're all fine. Okay? Now, I want you to understand a couple of things. One, there are are some people that basically enter into that agreement willingly. There are a whole bunch of other people that are rounded up in Europe and are not a part of that agreement. They're just taken. Okay? Initially, the sort of indentured servant trade is more profitable than the African slave trade in North America. Initially. Okay? And there are judges in England who are getting like some back deal pocket money, you know what I'm saying? Like behind closed doors, like I'm gonna slide you a little cash and you're gonna open up the jails and we're just gonna offload all these people, put them on ships and send them to America. Right? Because there's judges, there's the aristocrat, the elite in England that are like, dude, we don't want all these poor people wandering around London, it makes us look bad. Send them to America. Right? And yeah, I don't know if y'all learned this in world history. Like,
No.
do you know how Australia was founded?
Yes.
How?
And the prisoners went to.
Yeah, it's a penal colony. It's an English penal colony.
It's like Georgia's.
Right? Because England, dude, this is all of England. It's teeny tiny. Right? If you've got a whole bunch of people in prison in England, and by the way, prisoners eat up ridiculous resources. You understand that? Like, you got to pay to keep them warm, keep them clothed, keep them fed.
That's why if you're homeless, you should just
Yes.
go to jail.
Honestly, I'm gonna be honest with you.
Okay,
Like,
don't
you don't do that, right? But like, no. Actually, you really want to know what to do if you're ever homeless? Go rob a bank,
Oh yeah, I heard about some dude that actually.
right? Like, no. You don't even have to take no money, right? All you gotta do, right, is just walk in wearing a coat with your hand in your pocket, right? Fill out the little deposit slip. Walk up there on the deposit slip, be like, this is a holdup, I'm robbing the bank, and slide that to the teller and just stand there and wait for the cops to show up. You ain't even gotta take nothing. And then just go to prison and you'll be warm that night and fed. You'll get health care,
But like.
right?
Prisoners get treated.
Here's the thing, I will actually tell you, honestly, if you ever know that you're like about to be destitute, but you're not quite there yet, and you can get yourself to Norway, that's really where you want to do that. Norway prison cells are about the size of this room.
Bro.
It's one per. You get your own bathroom. You get your own living room with like an Xbox. Like, dude, they're like Norway prisons are the size of this building, and there's like 100 people in a prison.
You're American. You go to Norway.
Well, Norway might try to send you back. If I was running Norway, I would not let Americans. I mean, that says terrible things about the American economy. But anyways, we digress. So look, labor. Right? So, varying lengths of service, you have hundreds of thousands that are coming throughout the 16th century, 17th century, 1600s. And, again, kids are getting kidnapped. Here's the other thing that happens, though, and it's down there at the bottom, and I want you to understand this, because this is a governmental program that actually incentivizes the concept of indentured servanthood. Okay? So it incentivizes you rounding up white people and bringing them over. So if I'm a landowner, if I've got a little bit of money, right, and I'm going to go to England, right, if I'm going to go to the New World, right, I'm going to leave England, I'm going to come to the New World, I can pay my own way. When I get off a ship in Jamestown, in the Chesapeake, I get 50 acres. 50 acres of land. That's a lot of land. Okay? If I bring a servant with me, I get 100 acres. Because I get my 50 and his 50. Right? Now I'm there with the 100 acres and I'm making a little bit of money, yes? So I'm going to pay for more indentured servants to come over. Every single indentured servant I bring over, I get 50 acres of land for them. So you literally have like the elites owning thousands of acres of land. Thousands. This is how we get to the plantation system in Virginia. Do we understand that now? Like, does that make sense? So I want you to understand, like, if you got a question on the test that said, what is the outcome of the headright system? It would be massive plantations and a land-owning aristocracy. Right? Meaning, like, an aristocracy is a small group of elites. They own all of the land. All of it. Okay? That's a direct result of the headright system. Now, we do have the slave trade, right? Again, 1619, slaves are coming over. Aristocracy is a small group of people. Yes, ma'am. Hey, but just remember, guys, all of this is recorded, right? So, like, if you miss something, you can go back and listen to the recording. It'll be uploaded, hopefully by, like, lunch. All right? Okay, so we do have the slave trade, right? So we do have Africans coming, okay? I actually really hope that y'all are taught the African slave trade in a world history class and you're actually taught it correctly. When I was a child, I was taught incorrectly. I was taught that white Europeans went to Africa, rounded up Africans with guns, and brought them to the United States. That is not remotely accurate. Not remotely accurate. One, the vast majority of slaves did not come to the United States, right? What is the present day? In fact, I like this graphic. I like this graphic because it's actually like representative of where they came from in Africa and where they're being offloaded, right? And so you will notice that what is coming to North America, what is the United States, these are very small lines, especially in comparison to what goes to Brazil, right? I think it's over 40%. I'd have to go and look at the numbers here, right? And I haven't looked at them in a couple of years, so I'm not 100% certain I remember, but I think it was a little over 40% of all African slaves go to Brazil. Okay?
Did you say 40%?
40% of all Africans, like as a part of the slave trade, go to Brazil. Right? The largest per capita increase for the slave trade is the Caribbean. Right? So like, as the slave trade is occurring, there are Caribbean islands that are like 98% African. Right? I'm probably being a little hyperbolic there, but over 90% African. Okay? That means that more than 9 out of the 10 people living on that tiny little island are African. Okay? I'll be honest with you, I'm a little surprised that in some of those Caribbean nations, it took African slaves that long to like rise up and kill white. Right? Because the minute I'm 9 out of 10, like, bruh, we gonna win. Right? Even though the whitey's the only one with a gun, like, we still won't win. Y'all realize that, like, it took a long time to reload guns, yes? Right? I don't care if I don't even have a pitchfork, right? If there's 10 of me and 1 of you and you have a gun, you might shoot 2 of us before we beat you to death. You know what I'm saying? You might shoot 4 or 5 of us, right? Like, but you're not going to be able to take all of us, all right? So yes, the slave trade is significant, right? But we'll talk about this as we move on. One, because slavery, I think there was a historical effort called the 1619 Project that was looking at slavery in the United States. I think it emphasizes the importance of slavery. I think it draws some actually poor conclusions. And so we'll talk about slavery again as we move forward, right? But you can't discount slavery as a part of the American experience, right? Again, there's that incessant need for labor that begins as early as the early 1600s with tobacco and will continue actually well after the Civil War, right? We'll talk about that when we come back in January and how sort of slavery still continues after the Civil War and the actual emancipation of all black people, right? So again, by the end of the century, right? So by the end of the 17th century, so the end of the 1600s, when you're looking, and I think my numbers there were specific to Virginia, because Virginia is the one that's in the most need of labor, right? Only 2,000 of 8,000 like field hands, servants, enslaved or indentured peoples. Only a quarter of them are African by the year 1700. Okay? Again, the majority, that's a vast majority, are still poor whites coming probably more from Ireland than other places because the English hate the Irish.
End of 16th century?
The English have hated the Irish forever. Forever and ever. Right? Right? I mean, one of the things that hopefully you'll learn in here, like, there are significant times in history where being Irish is just as bad as being black in America. Like, it's just as bad as being black at certain times, and in certain places, right? Like I don't know if it was ever worse to be Irish than black in say like Mississippi, right? But there's definitely times where it's just as bad being Irish in like New York as it is being black in New York, right? So Jamestown eventually, the Virginia company eventually fails, right? It has to declare bankruptcy. It's not turning the profit that it sought to turn. And so now the crown is going to take over and Virginia is going to become a royal colony under like the control of the English monarchy, okay? So now the crown has stepped in. They have appointed a governor, that is William Berkeley, right? And Berkeley is going to basically take European ideals of aristocracy, right, and begin to apply them in Virginia, right? So now, once it's a royal colony in Virginia, land ownership sort of becomes the most important thing, right? What we'll actually find as we move forward is a whole bunch of our southern aristocrats specifically, right? Like our elites in the South are all actually poor, right? They have no real wealth except land, right? And in fact, when you get into like the 19th century, the quote-unquote rich people in the South had no cash and massive debt. The only thing they had of value were slaves and land. That's it. Okay? So this brings us to Stephen Hopkins. This is the dude that you read about yesterday, right? So Hopkins, I think I teased this story yesterday, right? Hopkins is going to be an indentured servant. Okay, so he's actually contracted by the Virginia company to go to Jamestown. Okay, so Jamestown is established in 1607. Hopkins is going to leave England in 1609. Right, he signs I believe a 5-year contract. Right, I believe that's what he signs. Okay, gets caught in a hurricane, what we think is a hurricane, right, in the Atlantic coast, because travel across the Atlantic is dicey at this point, right? On some level, they're correct to leave when they did, right? On another level, they're not correct to leave when they did, right? Like it's kind of nice to arrive in the summertime where it's warmer and you can like cut down trees and build your house and do stuff like that, right? We're gonna find when we get to Plymouth, they arrive in November. That sucks. Okay, but the reality is there's issues with ships and generating crew and things like that. So Hopkins' group leaves in June. They get caught in a hurricane in late July, and they're marooned. They're shipwrecked on Bermuda, right? During his time in Bermuda, he begins to sort of question the validity of Gates' leadership, right? Eventually, I think I told you that he was sort of tried for treason, okay, and sentenced to death. And that death sentence is commuted. He gets to live. One, and I think sort of for two reasons. One, you don't want to kill Hopkins as a mutineer because that just kills morale, right? And they're trying to like build new ships to finish the journey, right? So you don't want to kill your workers. You don't want to lower morale. The other thing is Hopkins is actually a clergyman, right? Like he actually exists as as sort of an aid to the minister. And so I would imagine, and I've seen some suggestion to this in historical texts, that the idea of executing a religious person doesn't sit well with the people either, right? Like you don't execute God's people, right? Eventually, they're going to be able to build boats on Bermuda that are big enough to finish that journey. And I think I showed you. Bermuda's basically right there off the coast of the Atlantic, right? They're going to make it to Jamestown in May. They actually make it to Jamestown, I kid you not, like 3 days before, or like a week before a full resupply comes, because their group didn't make it, right? Like, and Gates was supposed to take over as the leader of Jamestown. He's supposed to be like the new governor there in Jamestown. right? The executive, the person that's leading the colony, he doesn't make it, right? Obviously, we don't have like cell phones and satellites and things like that, so the assumption is that they're all dead, right? Once they are shipwrecked in Bermuda, nobody hears from them. The assumption is that they're dead. So the Virginia company basically hires a new guy to lead the colony and sends him. So Gates actually ends up showing up. He runs the colony for like a week. Then the new guy comes in, and Gates is like, all right, I'm done. I'm going back to England, right? Hopkins stays. He's going to continue to work out his contract. And then in 1614, his wife dies. We don't know if it's his first wife, second wife, third wife. He might have had up to 4 wives. We're not sure. Right? Well, but you gotta understand, mortality rates are different, right? Like I'm not saying he's got 4 wives because he keeps getting divorced. Divorce is not happening, right? But like maternal death rates are relatively high, right? Like having a baby is not a very obviously it's not nearly as safe as it is today, right? It was not uncommon for mothers to bleed out or die during the labor process back in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, right? So Hopkins goes back to England, right? Because of his time in the Virginia Company, right? He's actually much more well off when he returns to England than what he was when he left. So he comes back to England. He's sort of middle class now, right? He takes another wife, right? He gets remarried because you're just supposed to do that. And then in 1620, he is propositioned by the Pilgrims, right, by the Puritans, to return to the New World, right? During Hopkins' 4 years in Jamestown, he becomes fluent in sort of Algonquin, right, as a language, right? He learns how to communicate with Native Americans. The Pilgrims are smart enough to understand, to realize that having an interpreter with them, having somebody that knows about the culture of Native Americans, that knows about those aspects, would be wildly beneficial. Hopkins then is, because he's now middle class and he's being basically contracted by the Pilgrims, right? He's contracted by the Puritans rather than being sort of indentured. Okay, he's going to be able to bring his family with him, right? So his wife, whichever wife this is, and children are now going to travel to the New World with him. He is actually wealthy enough at this point in his life, he brings a servant with him, right? So the Pilgrims, right, are going to set sail. They set sail actually in September. They tried to set sail much earlier, but they ran into problems. What? No, it's okay. It's okay. They arrive in the Massachusetts Bay area, right? So they arrive off the coast of Massachusetts in November of 1620. Now, here's one of the things that you need to understand, and I didn't tell you about this in Jamestown because I wanted to juxtapose it with this. Jamestown, if you go back and look at a map of where Jamestown is, I told you the people in Jamestown are stupid, yes? Get rich quick? Okay, so here's the thing. If you were to establish a new community somewhere in the 17th century, what is the very first thing that you would look for in building your town? What? Water. Water, like number one. Right? The Jamestown people, dude, they built their community where there was dirty water. Okay? Like, no wonder all of them are dying. You built your town with dirty water. Like, that's just stupid. The Pilgrims are smart enough, like, they get there in November. They spend almost a month bouncing around the bay and the coast there, looking for the correct spot to establish their community. They don't just pull up, jump off the boat, and be like, well, we're here. They want to make sure that they have access to clean water, fresh water, right? Because y'all understand you can't drink salt water, right? Hopefully you know that. Right? If you were ever marooned at sea, do not drink salt water.
Doesn't it make you more dehydrated?
It'll make you more dehydrated, yes. Okay? So ultimately what ends up happening, because they spent weeks looking for a place to build, they're going to actually spend sort of the first winter on the ships because they can't actually like build anything, right? Ultimately what they find, the site that they find is actually already cleared, right? Now again, I want you to think about this logically. Like you get to the New England area, there's no community, there's no civilization, yes? So what exists in New England at this point? Trees, forests, right? In order to be able to survive, you have to cut down trees, use the cut down trees to build homes, then pull out the stumps of where the cut down tree is, and then use that area that you've now cleared to plant crops and grow food, right? Okay, so they find an area that's already been cleared, which means that one, it tells them this is farming land for Native Americans, right? That's actually pretty good. Now you realize, okay, that means the soil here is good, we can grow crops. So that area becomes sort of ideal. The downside to that, though, is where are your trees? They're on the edge of that cleared off area. So in order to build homes, they're cutting down trees and then having to drag the trees a quarter mile or more to go build a home somewhere. Okay? Just a fun fact, while they're searching for a site, they actually come across an Indian storage site for corn. And so they steal it because they're starving. It creates a little bit of hostility with the natives and the pilgrims initially. They're going to try to get over that relatively quickly. And while they're on the ship that winter, they do create the Mayflower Compact, which is a social contract, right? Social contract theory is just the idea that you're free. You have freedom as a human being, but you have obligations to the community, right? That's the contract. So in order to have a civilized community, there are certain things that you have to do that quote-unquote limit your freedom, right? But part of the idea with this is that everything is going to be just and everything is going to be equal, right? So under the social contract theory, you're going to have equal protection under the laws where people are all treated fairly legally, right? Eventually, Massasoit, yeah, I think we talked about him with the Native Americans. He is the tribal leader of the Wampanoag. I think that's how you pronounce it. They are going to come to a peace agreement, largely brought about because of Hopkins and a Native American named Squanto, okay, who was actually taken years earlier. He was taken out off the coast of New England by a group of English that were there fishing. He actually went back to England, worked as an indentured servant, eventually gained his freedom, eventually came back to the New World as sort of a guide / interpreter, and then with that group of whites that they were slaughtered by Native Americans by the Wampanoag, and Squanto is basically absorbed into that tribe, right? So he has some experience with whites. Hopkins has some experience with natives. They're going to be able to sit down and have a positive relationship because they sort of understand each other, right? And then in 1621, that's where we get that pop culture fable of Thanksgiving. It comes out of these people, right? Okay, so the Plymouth colony, they're Puritans, they're pilgrims, they were people that were actually leaving Europe because they were unhappy with the Anglican Church, right? They thought the Anglican Church was corrupt, that it needed to be purified, right? That's literally why they're called Puritans. Okay? They had actually left England years before. They were living in Holland. Do we know where Holland is?
No.
So Holland is a region of the Netherlands. right? So this is sort of right there where my dot is on that world map, right? So they actually leave England and go east to Holland. They live in Holland for a while because Holland has more religious freedom. And then they are convinced to go to the New World. And so they do that. Shortly after the Pilgrims arrive, there is a second joint stock company that is going to be chartered. And really it's just colony. I think it's Company 2 at one point, right? So it was supposed to be north of Virginia. It ends up being in the Massachusetts Bay. If you go back to the map a couple of slides ago, right, you'll see where Boston is, right? And if you know anything about Massachusetts kind of comes out. It's very linear, east to west, and then it dips down a little bit, and then there's like some islands that hook out there. That's the Massachusetts Bay in there. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony is created. It's also a very religious colony. The people that are coming are still Anglicans. They're not the same as the Puritans. They don't. The Massachusetts Bay Colony religious people want to fix the church from the inside rather than being sort of separatists where they want to create a new church. Okay. Ultimately, the Massachusetts Bay Company will eventually annex Plymouth, right? So eventually, the Massachusetts Bay Company will extend to include the Pilgrims. They're going to be run by a dude named John Winthrop, and Winthrop is a grade A-hole, right? Yeah. So here's what I find just ridiculous. I don't understand this. These are people, the New England people are people that are fleeing England because of religious persecution, right? And then they get to New England, and what do they immediately do? Establish an official religion and persecute anybody not a part of it. Like, having learned nothing from their own experiences, right? Ultimately, it goes so far that, again, if we're to look at a map, right, so there's Massachusetts, right, and it dips down there. Rhode Island and Connecticut are sort of right underneath of it. Both Rhode Island and Connecticut are created by people that are basically kicked out of Massachusetts because of religion, right? Like, God forbid you're a woman and you think God speaks to you because now you got to go, right? So Rhode Island gets chartered as a royal colony, and so just so you know, this is the second. Royal colony is the second of the three ways that they can be created, right? Joint stock is one. Royal colony is two. A proprietorship will be number three. We'll get there. Okay? Right? So we're going to create a royal colony, which means the King of England is going to sanction this. It is founded by those people that are fleeing Massachusetts due to religious persecution. Right? Roger Williams becomes the leader of Rhode Island. He is banished by Winthrop. Okay? Which, on some level, banishment, when you're talking about the 1700s in the New World, banishment is, 17th century New World. Banishment is almost a death sentence, right? Because you have to go out and start all over, all on your own, and there's no community to help you. There is no additional people to help you build your town and your home and things like that, right? Rhode Island will offer absolute religious freedom, so you have religious freedom in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island will eventually become prosperous through the transatlantic slave trade. All right? So we'll stop with Rhode Island, and then we'll continue on Friday. All right? So thank you very much. Have a good day. Hey, no quiz. Remember, there's not a quiz because we did not get through everything.